Hola, ¿qué tal? Es el último día de la conferencia. ¿Cómo están? ¿Cansados? ¿Emocionados? ¿Hicieron nuevos amigos? Quiero agradecer a los organizadores por invitarme. Siempre escuchar que esta conferencia es genial y ahora entiendo por qué. Barcelona es mi ciudad favorita del mundo y es lindo estar cerca de Barcelona a la playa. Don't worry, I'm going to speak English now. Thank you. I am really happy to be in Spain and near Barcelona, and I am really happy to be here. This has been such a great event so far, hasn't it? No? Come on, there's been some amazing talks, right? Ashley's talk was awesome. I went away and wrote something for my team after that. Ellen's new thing is so cool, I just can't wait to use it. And Philip, yesterday, he was actually my undergraduate thesis advisor, so it was just like a flashback 12 years for me. But an hour into this conference, I was like, fuck being in charge of things, I want to write code again. Is anybody else I want to go and write code again? Yeah, but unfortunately, I haven't told my boss that yet, so maybe don't tweet at him. And for now, I'm still in charge of things, so I'll talk about unfucking teams. So let me just explain the raccoons. Does anybody else love raccoons? Okay, well, you will love raccoons at the end, because I don't want to spoiler alert for my talk, but these raccoons are fucking going to space, y'all. But people talk about engineering management like it's herding cats. But for me, I always think that, software engineers are like raccoons, curious and weird and independent and desperately trying to live their best lives in a world that doesn't truly understand them and where they keep fucking things up like democracy. So, yeah. Thank you, I appreciate the laughs. All right, so my name is Cate, and I am a fixer. So I take teams that are struggling, and I help them improve, deliver more, deliver better, and feel happier. But what does that have to do with your team, right? Your team is probably fine, yeah? How do you know, though? If I ask you how good your team is, do you have an answer? Are you sure? What's your frame of reference? Now, in general, almost everyone thinks that their team could be better, but also everyone thinks that their team is mostly okay. So what if I ask you a different question? How much has your team improved in the last year? Now, how confident are you? So people tend to have more confidence improvement, right? Which makes sense, because let's think of a concrete example. Is 30 story points good? I got no fucking idea, right? It's entirely contextual. So a lot of things become clearer when you realize that it's easier to measure progress than state. And so then we can reframe the question, not from how can we be right, but how can we be less wrong? So let's reframe the question. It's not how do you get a good team, but how do teams improve? So I'm just going to reduce my value into capitalism here and tell you that I'm not really a fixer, because there is no fixer. Turning around a team takes a team, and it's really an adventure that you go on together. So I'm more of a facilitator than a fixer. So today we're going to talk about 4 layers of team functioning, and we're going to ask 4 questions. So when I think of a team, I think of 4 layers, right? And so we can think of these in terms of communication, but this is also the work that we do to create clarity and agreement at each level. So mission, the why, strategy, the how, tactics, the what, and execution, the do. So the mission is the why, right? And it's useful at the level that it tells you not just what you do, but what you don't do. So Automatic has a mission to democratize publishing, but that's really too broad for any one team. So when I was running the mobile team, we would talk about making a great experience for mobile-only or mobile primary users. So what don't we do? Well, we don't try and make computer users happy, which is probably many of you. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. So the team I run now, our developer experience team, we try to be a support for the entire engineering organization, and we focus on acting as an accelerant at the inflection points in teams and individuals. So there's some key words there, right? Inflection point. So are we inviting ourselves to people's weekly meetings? Absolutely not. And another key word is support. So do we dictate? Vehemently no. Now, teams without a mission don't know what their purpose is. Their failure mode is analysis paralysis and abdicating decisions. So how do you determine a mission? Well, your mission should be aspirational, but also within grasp. Now, often the where is handed down. We're going to the moon. But it's on you to extract and articulate the why, to craft a sentence that captures the purpose and guiding principle of your team. Now, how important is it? Well, the main benefit is better decision making. Teams without a mission often spiral and spin from things to thing, but having a mission doesn't help without everything else. The how, the strategy is the how. And your strategy is made up of proximate objectives. I'm a bit obsessed with this word. It comes from this amazing book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, that there'll be a quote from later. And it's your next achievable goals. So, on mobile, when we talked about making what could be great on mobile great, we could break it down. Like, what can be great? Media, notifications, offline. These can all be amazing experiences mobile natively, but the work for each of them is different, and we can separate it out. Lately, my team has been working on scaling our hiring process. We're hiring. We have a number goal, but the initial focus was on building the capacity because it's much more tractable. And once you have that capacity, then you can push on your other levers. Now, strategy is the decisions made to deliver on the mission. If you haven't made the decisions, then you can't work towards it. And teams without a strategy struggle to make decisions because almost anything can be declared to support the mission. So how do you determine the strategy? Well, good strategy requires both depth and breadth. It takes the content of your team, the organization, and the broader world. The thing is, most strategy is bad. A good strategy does more than urges towards a goal or a vision. A good strategy honestly acknowledges the challenges being faced and provides an approach to overcoming them. And the greater the challenge, the more a good strategy focuses and coordinates efforts to achieve a powerful competitive punch or problem-solving effect. Bad strategy tends to skip over pesky details such as problems. It ignores the power of choice and focus, trying instead to accommodate a multitude of conflicting demands and interests. Like a quarterback whose only advice to teammates is, "Let's win," bad strategy covers up its failure to guide by embracing the language of broad goals, ambition, vision, and values. Has anyone seen some bad strategy lately? Yeah. I read this book, and all these things had just been pissing me right off. I was like, oh my God, yes. Finally, I see it. Anyway, so strategy taken from one place won't work elsewhere, and this is actually one of the most common failure modes for executives. And this can be true even within your organization because everything is contextual. Now, strategy is tangible, and progress can be measured. So when we decided to improve the media experience on mobile, we could identify improvements based on user feedback, looking at other best-in-class mobile experiences, and it can be measured, so we could have metrics around media upload. When we've been building out capacity in our hiring process, it's very tangible because we know how many interviews we can schedule or do schedule in a given week, and we know how quickly someone can schedule in. Now, the most important piece of strategy is what you decide not to do. Some things you might decide not yet, and some things you might decide not ever, but non-decisions are decisions to fail. So you develop your strategy by looking at the different ways to make progress and actively making decisions. Now, you really need to understand your metrics. So what are your leading indicators for the high-level goal? In hiring, it's so easy because there's people at every stage in the process. In software, it can be a little bit more complicated, but you can always find things like how does your one-week retention influence your one-month retention, your annual renewal? And your strategy has to fit the team you have. If you might have 10 initiatives, but if you can only staff 2, then you have to choose 2. because doing everything is not a strategy. And the other thing to think about with your strategy is what would make you change your approach. So you commit, and then you validate, and then you recommit. Tactics are the what. Now, these are the concrete things that makes it go. You can also think of this as the process layer, right? And this is the layer that makes the connection between the strategy and the work of the individual. Now, tactics must be in support of the strategy, because tactics without strategy is just busy work. Good process is always in service of an outcome. Teams without tactics cannot effectively collaborate, because collaboration is hard, and it only gets harder at scale. So tactics are kind of like your team APIs that manage your integration points between teams and upwards. So how do you determine your tactics, right? Well, what do you need to know to be effective? What do you need to measure? And how is this problem generally solved? We rarely need to reinvent things in engineering teams, but we do need to be selective. So process should never be adopted wholesale, mainly because it won't be adopted wholesale. But often we can look at the individual problems, and we can find some standard ways to address them. Now, developers talk a lot about hating process. Which of you has said this? No, I can't see anyone, so I don't know why I'm asking you, but I want you to feel like I care about your opinion. So my theory is that developers talk about hating process, but they really love it. It's just when they love it, they call it culture. So, instead of asking what process do you need, you can instead ask what kind of culture do you need to be successful? So how can we build a culture of collaboration? What would help? Stand-ups, pairing, team calls. And how can we build a culture that values users? What would help? User research, support feedback. And how can we build a culture of sustainable delivery? What would help? Regular releases, retrospectives, attention to defects, and other metrics. Now, the cultural questions will push you to make your processes coherent and supporting of what you want to achieve. So execution is the deal, and there's a manager joke that says, if managers call people resources, then they can call you overhead. But honestly, management is overhead, right? Like everything we do is in service of people actually getting stuff done. And the execution layer is where progress is made. Now, without all the other layers, then this is just activity, but everything else without this means nothing because nothing happens. Now, how do you determine the execution? This is very easy. Are there people doing things? And is it clear what needs done? Now, hopefully, as I was talking, you were seeing how this could apply to your teams, And like this rocket, everything needs to fit together. Few teams do all of these things equally well, And it's quite common in tech to see people who only value execution. And on some level, that's fair enough, right? Because it is the foundation for everything else. But execution is most effective when it fits in a coherent framework. Now, leaders often go to what they're most comfortable with. We've all met and usually hated the person with a new process for every occasion. And at the other end of the scale, there's the vision person who thinks that everything will be fine and clear once they have just determined the vision, normally by themselves. Both of them are wrong, right? Like, neither of these things are true. The other layers need to be there as well. Because otherwise, the raccoons, they're never going to get to the moon. So I promised you 4 questions, and these don't map to the layers. You can ask them at every layer. It's more like a grid. And these questions are, how can I create clarity? How can I create capacity? What do I want to incentivize? And how are my feedback loops? So there's a quote from Tolstoy that says, happy teams are all alike. Every unhappy team is unhappy in their own way. But I'm not sure I agree with Tolstoy, because unhappy teams tend to be tediously predictable. They're not delivering, they feel like victims, and they're kind of lost. Now, when you have a struggling team, the first question is, normally, where do I begin? This is after you get off the phone to your BFF where you've been crying, what have I done? But I think the more helpful questions are, how do I create clarity, and how do I create capacity? Now, every struggling team I've encountered seems to be experiencing some kind of existential crisis about who we are or what our purpose is. Now, it's the mission question, right? But, I'm a pragmatist, so this often seems to be quite beside the point. if we're not shipping, does it really matter what we're not shipping? How can we possibly know what we should be doing 2 or 5 years from now if we don't have a clear idea of what we're doing today? So the thing about the existential crisis is that it is comfortable. It is a team bonding experience because it unites the team against a common enemy. Now, uniting against a common enemy is not a good team building strategy, but you really cannot fault it for short-term effectiveness. Now, no one else feels threatened by the existential crisis because, it's largely someone else's problem. And everyone can have an opinion about it because it's abstract enough that they probably won't have to do anything. Now, vision debates are the bike shedding of team purpose and structure. Sorry, there's a man down there taking unflattering photos of me. Can you, the selfie angle is much better for me, but also I don't want you that close. So, yeah, okay, cool. So, clarity is harder because it's more immediate and it has to be based on what's happening today, which means, remember that quote on strategy? Which means that you need to confront what's actually happening today. There's no hiding behind a lack of vision. Our team's delivering. Our project's drifting on and on with no end in sight. And are we doing things because they're interesting, or are we doing them because they're valuable? The more concrete we get, the harder it is to get everyone in agreement. A wide range of opinions can find shelter in a broad, fuzzy mission statement in a way that is not possible in a narrow and clear one, like the kind of thing that articulates a proximate objective. Clarity involves hard conversations, hard truths, and defining first 1, then 2 steps ahead. It's hard work that often looks small from the outside, right? It's no here, no there, refining this, refining that. And it's often stating what at least some people believe to be true anyway, such as what isn't going well or what the next steps include. But it is the most effective way I've found to stop teams from drifting and get them to start executing. So what actions you might take to achieve clarity really depend on the team, but typically you might take stock of all ongoing projects as well as the purpose and timeline for each of these projects. What's their strategic objective? You might articulate the current priorities of the team, the purposes of those priorities, and the rationale behind making them priorities. And you might clearly define the scope of upcoming milestones in every current and new project. You might determine the time frame that you predict, so we're focused on media through the end of Q4, and highlight the parallel work that will help determine what's next. And you might make sure that project status is visible and teams have visibility into each other's work. So struggling teams often suffer from a sense of overload, and often this is very unevenly distributed across the team. So some people are exceptionally relaxed, and others seem alarmingly overworked. Now, if you view your team as a system, then you'll see where you have bottlenecks that, if they were cleared, would increase the overall capacity of the team. So 2 books I really like on this are Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows and A Beautiful Constraint. Now, what you might do depends on where the bottlenecks are. You might reduce the number of things that your team is working on because there are too many people working alone. You might take a more strategic approach to inbound requests because you can't keep playing whack-a-mole. You might realign people closer to the work that they want to do and give some people clear feedback about where they're falling short. And you might get the team to talk about timelines and embrace continuous delivery because if that force only comes from the outside, it's very destructive. Now, if you manage managers, improving them as leaders will always create capacity on your team. Their teams will get better and you can rely on them more and delegate more effectively. Now, sometimes it feels like we don't have time to coach the people around us, but medium term, not even long term, we don't have time not to. So you can always come back to these questions because the answers change over time, and there is always a bottleneck, and some level of confusion is part of the ambiguity of human communication. It's important to make sure that you're not staying where you're comfortable, and there's a different answer for each different layer. You have to really look at what's most pressing. And it's also worth noting that sometimes you do the work, and sometimes you encourage others to do the work. So it wouldn't be a talk on teams without this quote, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think about this in terms of the next 2 questions. What am I incentivizing, and how are my feedback loops? So there's a concept of self-managing teams, which I prefer to frame as self-improving teams. Self-improving teams have feedback loops that make getting better over time a team effort. They respond well to failure, and they learn as much from it as possible. They use estimation as a way to better surface the known and unknown unknowns. And they invest in collaboration that levels up both individuals and the collective. And the question that might emerge from this is like, okay, well, cool, if you have a self-improving team, like, what's the role of a manager? Aren't you redundant now? And, honestly, I'm okay with that, because then I could go back to writing code. But no, it really reframes the role of a team lead as someone who enables the team and who acts as an accelerant. It means moving away from the need to control and the feeling that the value you bring comes from the power you have, towards a coaching mindset and the acceptance that the value you bring is best shown in output and team health rather than anything you actively and obviously do. Every new manager struggles to let go of the individual work they were doing before and achieved some level, presumably, of mastery at. And it's really hard to enter into this mindset, but it is easy to claim it. Many managers talk about servant leadership, which often just means that either they're an ineffective doormat to their team because you can't be the servant of people you have power over, or they use it to kind of abdicate responsibility for the day-to-day. Like, responsibility can only be a product of power and control, although often not even then. And power without responsibility is a form of sociopathy. The best leaders master multiple leadership styles, and they know when they're best deployed. They know when to take the hard line of an authoritative stance, and when a situation is bad enough that a coercive style is necessary. They know when a team would benefit from someone setting the pace. And they know when to optimize for the increased buy-in of the democratic process, even if it means a little slower progress. And they know when a team needs an affiliative leader to help them bond. They know when showing up as a collaborator will get the best out of someone, and when someone needs a coach. Now, we all have our go-to, our default style that we lean on, but it's not appropriate for every occasion, and the more that we can build out capabilities in different styles authentically and deploy them regularly, the more versatility we have for different situations. The authoritarian leader who suddenly shows up as a coach may not be believed or trusted, but the coaching leader who suddenly shows up as an authoritative leader may just not be taken seriously. The self-improving team is a place for the democratic and affiliative styles, but above all, I think the manager is coach and collaborator. Like all good coaches, you want to ask good questions. And like any good collaborator, you need to be willing to get in there and provide active help. In almost every situation, you will get the behavior you incentivize. So if you say that you value feedback but you silence dissent, you won't hear what people are thinking. If you say you value simplicity and user experience but you promote people based on complexity, well, you're going to get a lot of complexity. The gap between claimed values and actual incentives is organizational hypocrisy. Now, being clear about the incentives and rewarding the things that you want to see is key to making sure that the team is aligned. If you want to incentivize collaboration, you can't evaluate purely on individual metrics. And if you want to incentivize honesty, you have to be willing to hear things that are difficult or that you may not want to hear. If you want to deliver user value, you need to make sure that you recognize that work. So the role of a manager in a self-improving team is to ensure that incentives align with team improvement. Now, people only improve consistently if they get feedback. So feedback loops need to be 1, tight, and 2, positive. This doesn't just mean feedback on what people could do better, although that is important. Feedback is just someone's work reflected back to them. And so making sure that people get consistent feedback and appreciation and incentive for what they're already doing well is really important. Giving people only constructive or worse, negative feedback will cause them to avoid you. Now, say we launch a new feature and we want to set up feedback loops around if anything goes wrong, right? Like monitoring for downtime, support volume. But it's also really important to set up the feedback loops for what we hope will go right, like usage, positive feedback. The role of a manager in a self-improving team is to build and contribute to healthy, productive feedback cycles. Now, you'll get what you incentivize, and it really doesn't matter how you feel about that. A friend told me about a company no longer celebrating promotions because they didn't want people to be so focused on them. And I'm like, sure, but if you've created that kind of culture, the celebration is probably the least of it. And also, who stops people from celebrating? Now, a good team has strong and coherent communication. And this is a product of psychological safety, as is the ability to treat failure as a learning opportunity. They have a good idea of what can be done and how. This is how those teams ship regularly. They understand why things should be done and why things shouldn't. They make decisions. And they have aligned incentives and strong feedback cycles. This allows developing of individuals within the team, creating growth and opportunity. So your team, like my team, well, they're probably fine, right? But they could probably be better too. And the stronger we build our teams, the further we can go.